I'm going to give the overview to get things going. So talk about the Lead Service Line Replacement and Notification Act, and then on the back end, reiterate some of the things that Pete just talked about relative to funding. I think by now, especially if you're participating in ISAWWA efforts, you've probably seen a little bit of this. So we were selective, I guess, in going over some of the things. If there's some things that clearly didn't get into enough detail, please talk to us during the break or otherwise, and we'll certainly fill you in more. The way that my presentation is structured, I'm going to go through a couple background things just to set the foundation for you before we jump in, and then get into the Lead Service Line Replacement Notification Act summary. So I'm going to walk through the components that I think are most important to you in a high level, and then presentations behind me are going to drill down deeper into the ones that really need to focus on here coming up. And then again, in the back end, talk about funding, and then a couple closing remarks. Okay, before we get into this room probably knows most, maybe all of these acronyms, but we did want to include them on the slide just in case there's something that comes up. By the way, we should have explained a little bit. I don't think we have yet. So you've got the handouts for our infographics, right? You've got the pad, and in front of you, you also have a memory stick. All of the presentations are on that memory stick. So we didn't know, should we print out and have all that paper for everybody or just have it digital? We thought digital would work out best. Certainly, if you want a hard copy, just let us know, or you can print it off from that overall memory stick. Acronyms, some of the keys I think for today, the FLSLR is the full lead service line replacement, if you haven't seen that before. And then the PLSLR is the partial lead service line replacement, if you haven't seen that before. And then some other ones there. I won't take the time, I guess, right now to go through that because we've got an action-packed day for you. As Pete stated, I think it's well understood at this point that lead is not good. Certainly there are different areas and places that you can get lead exposure, and probably even drinking water is not the highest point of exposure. In most cases, it's actually through paint, but it is a concern. There is studies out there that have shown it's a concern. There's even studies that have shown that within water, it's a concern. And CDC has said that for children who seem to be most affected by it, there's no safe blood level for them that exists. Lead ends up affecting the brain, red blood cells, and kidneys, so certainly can be pretty serious. The health risks for lead, or that it's heightened, would affect pregnant women, infants and young children, and other vulnerable populations. And too much lead in a child can last for a long time and cause growth and development issues. So it is real. I mean, I think this room agrees with that, knows that. As one thing that we found when we're addressing city councils and village boards, it is important to cover this topic up front, typically for them, just so that they all understand that as well. Okay, so we've done our best, I think, as a company to try to get resources out to help you and others within the water industry. Hopefully all of you in this room have at least seen one of our constant contacts come through. We've issued multiple of them, and we've also set up a within our website, web pages specifically devoted to lead and copper. You can find all of our infographics on our website through that resource page. There's also kind of a running history of what's going on. So if you're kind of curious where things are at, or maybe the history in the last 6 months, you can go there and look at that listing overall. And then we also have some technical resources there. So the web address is right there on the slide. Again, you'll have that as part of your memory stick. But if you simply just go to our website, you'll be able to find it as well. And then again, we've issued actually 5 infographics so far. This was the very first infographic, which was intended to give an overall overview of the Lead Service Line Replacement and Notification Act. And then we drilled down into some of these items with the other infographics. Okay, so Again, like I mentioned, we've issued 5. So in June, we issued the overview of the Lead Service Line Replacement and Notification Act. And then in July, we issued the roadmap to compliance to identify the timelines. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more today, as well as Tim will talk about that too. And then in August, we issued the no partial lead service line replacement. This is a really important takeaway for today as the requirements. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit later in the presentation. And that starts January 1st. So it's right around the corner here for that. In September, we issued the funding sources. So focusing a lot on the IEPA loan program as kind of the main funding source right now for lead service line replacement. We're going to talk again about that today. And then in October, we issued a infographic on material inventories, and Kristen is going to be covering this as well as more details related to inventories. And then the one that's going to come out next week, and you guys will see that then, is the lead service line replacement plan. So we've developed an infographic to explain all of the details, the components that are required as part of that plan, and Tim Holdeman is going to talk about that today with you. Timeline, getting into, and here again, their infographic for the roadmap to compliance. The key dates are there in the upper right-hand corner for compliance. So January 1, 2022 is when this act is more or less effective. And that's also when it starts with the no partial lead service line replacements. Looks like I forgot a letter in there. This, as we'll see when I drill down into a little bit, is a little bit of a misnomer. It's not actually the no partials, because there is a notification process that you can go through if you've got non-responsive residents, but that's ultimately the goal. And I think this group should just remember, again, the challenges with lead. We should certainly try to do what we can to do the full lead service line replacements. Obviously, if you have a resident that just simply doesn't want you in their house, or it doesn't want to let you do it, and you can't, and then there's a process that you would follow with that. The electronic submittal for the water service line inventory as part of this act is due on April of 2023. You obviously are already doing this every year, which was part of the original legislation. Not probably a lot of change related to this. The one thing I should say is it's our understanding the IEPA is taking the legislative act right now, and they're converting that into the regulations, writing those regulations so that it fits into the Title 35. The presumption is that, you know, there isn't much for interpretation as part of this, but you'll see that coming out hopefully pretty soon, being that it's effective January 1st. 2024 is when your final inventory is due. So that's when you really should have all your unknowns taken care of, and you understand what is lead and what's copper, what's other materials. 2024, that's when you're going to start your initial lead service line replacement plan as well, to develop that. And then you've got 3 more years. 2027 is when that plan is completed. So that's when it's done. Now is the time, based on at least the regulation, when you have to move forward with the replacements based on your percentages that are defined within the act, which we're going to go through in moving forward. And then Tim's going to talk about the progress reports that are due there as well. And we've identified, you know, initially it's annually for the first 10 years and every 3 years after that. These are the main components to the act. The text that it's in bold form, I'm going to talk about a little bit more in detail. The items that are not in bold, the first 2 anyway, inventory and plan, we're going to have separate presentations on that. Kristen's going to talk about inventory. And then, like I said, Tim's talking about the plan. So I'm going to hit the WBE, MBE, DBE requirements. We're going to show the schedule, which I'm sure you've seen a lot at this point. We certainly have that within one of the infographics that we issued. There is an advisory board. They have established the fund. The reason why I'm not going into detail on that is there's no money in it. So why really talk about it today, at least for now, could be in the future, and then go through the process for the no partial lead service line replacement notifications. So the MBE, WBE, so the minority businesses, women business, and disadvantaged businesses requirements, the act does establish essentially goals and that you need to make good faith effort to hit these percentages. So overall, the goal is 20%. And then they drill down even deeper than that, trying to get 11% for minority businesses, 7% from women-owned businesses, and 2% with persons with disabilities. So there's a whole process. If you've gone through the IEPA loan program, it's probably not too unfamiliar to you because this is an approach there as well for goals to be able to get those contractors or give them a chance and try on these projects and ultimately try to increase the percentages across the board. The timelines, this infographic again, we're flashing all over the place. The key here is that the percentage is what ultimately you have to follow. So if your lead service lines fall within these categories, the timeline, it's up to the timeline, but the percentages are the key. So I'm pretty sure that the city of Chicago is the only municipality that has more than 100,000 lead service lines. In fact, they have close to 400,000 lead service lines. They have to replace 2%, which would equate out to 50 years. And then when you work your way down from there. So if you fall within the time frame of the 10 to 99, it's 3%. And then from 5 to more or less 5%, and less than 1,200, you have to do 7% of those lead service lines per year. We did the math for you to show you what the percentages are. We struggled with it ourselves, we admit. So just put them on there. They're on the slide here, obviously. And then again, they're going to be on the memory stick for you so that you don't necessarily have to do the math. But if you're in that range, you want to see what the outside ranges are. Lead service line replacement advisory board. It's kind of interesting. It's set up with 28 members and they're very specific. All that whole list on the right side of the slide is the folks that need to have representatives on the board. I'm not going to go through each one. It's listed actually in the act in this exact same order. I did that intentionally. The one thing I guess to point out here is the very bottom is the 10 mayors of the 10 largest communities. And then there's a couple others that are utilities, but folks that are actually with utilities and are providing water to the citizens are kind of in the minority on this advisory board, which is, I think, a little weird. That's what was passed, so that's the way it goes. They will, work as a board, and their overall role defined within the act is the items listed here on the slide. So they'll, give the agency best practices, and in this case, throughout the act, the agency is the Department of Public Health when we're talking about it. They're going to monitor the progress of the community water systems toward their goals. They're going to advise the agencies on matters related to the administration of the act. Maybe someday they would end up working with the Lead Service Line Replacement Fund if it ends up getting funded. And then the last bullet, of course, is technical support, which I'm sorry, a little chuckle on that based on how the advisory board is made up, but I'm hoping that the municipalities would be able to lead the charge in providing the technical support to that group. Okay, getting into the no partial lead service line replacement, have 2 slides on this. Again, it was part of our no partial lead service line replacement infographic. So you've got that within your materials there, and you can look at it specifically. The approach to this notification, how you go about it, timelines, et cetera, depend on what the nature of the work is. So this flow chart, if it's an emergency repair, then the community water supply has to notify the affected building owners with the lead service line or suspected and begin the process of full lead service line replacement. You'll notice there's the arrows running down because there is more to that, and we'll go through that on the second slide. If it's part of a planned water main project, then you have to notify the affected building owners and residents 45 days and 14 days before work begins. So you need to build that into your construction projects to have the appropriate notification. Certainly want to document that if somebody asked about it in the future. And then if the customer initiates a lead service line replacement, then you have to give them notice 45 days beforehand. the building owner provides the community water supply 45 days notice in advance. And then the community water system has to replace the public side within 30 days after completion of the private side. Now, obviously, the preference would be the sooner the better. And even if you could replace it on the same day, that's better, because as you go in or anybody goes in and physically disrupts that service line, then it will start to leach lead. So, there is filters that would be part of this process to help protect against this, but ideally, if you can get it all taken care of at one time, the better it is for the homeowner. So first two, like I said, you have those notification requirements, but there's more to it if they're not ready or willing to go with it. So notify that building owner and resident of the partial lead service line repair. So if they're refusing to allow you access, if they want nothing to do with, they're like, nope, you're not getting inside of my house, or they're just not responding whatsoever, you can go through this process. You do have to provide filters to them, and you have to provide filters to them until the lead service line has been replaced. So if they're really stubborn and don't respond to you or anybody, then that could be a fair amount of time. Now, you also have the notification in the third box there within 30. So from a seasonal perspective, if it's in the middle of the winter and there's an issue, you do have time to be able to wait. If you can't replace the lead service line, then you've got the 120 days. Otherwise, it's the 30 days. If, again, they are not allowing you in the house, they're not ready to do it, you then need to notify the Department of Public Health. So theoretically, the Department of Public Health would look into it. I would have to guess that if there's a child in the house, then they would, go out there and approach that resident, really try to push to get that full lead service line replacement. Meanwhile, again, you do have to provide the filters overall. Next, then, getting into funding here. Again, the intent there was to hit the highlights. Kristen and Tim are going to fill in more of that as they present later. So funding for lead service line replacements, the first, what tends to be one that most communities are going to get money is the Illinois State Revolving Fund. So it's referred in a lot of different ways, Public Water Supply Low Interest Loan Fund, but the fund that's routed through the IEPA. We've started to hear some of the communities that are using their ARPA funds to be able to fund lead service line replacements. As I'm sure you know, there is some restrictions relative to using that money for road projects. So it seems that a lot of people are focusing on water and sewer with that money, and certainly lead is an option there. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is the infrastructure bill, EJA, that is, still, I guess, in front of Congress on the national level, and then it's tied in with the separate bill. So if or when, presumably, that ends up getting passed, then that money will flow through. What we're being told is it seems extremely likely that that money locally for the water and sewer is going to flow through the IEPA loan program. So a key is to position yourself for the loan program when that money comes down. So for those folks that were part of the ARRA money that was back during the Great Recession, that money came from the feds, routed through the loan program, and then routed to the municipalities. So the key is, again, positioning yourself to get that money. And we're talking $hundreds of millions that would be routing through to the IEPA there. And then someday, perhaps the Illinois Lead Service Line Replacement Fund would be available. When they were talking with the act, they were talking about a funding source for that. For those that were following it, they were actually talking about applying a fee to every customer of community water system, and the rate depended on the median income of the house. So it ranged, I think, somewhere between, say, 10 cents per 1,000 gallons up to 40 to 50 cents per 1,000 gallons. That was in one of the drafts. Eventually that got taken out. And they didn't fund it, but I guess I wouldn't be surprised if something like that came back at some point in the future if they were worried about funding for lead service line replacement. Last thing that I probably should have put on here is, of course, water rates in your enterprise fund. So the three phases of the state revolving fund are: first is the project plan phase, then either in concert with the project plan, or after that, you would roll into the loan application, and typically at that same time, you're doing the design of the improvements or development of a project manual. And then the third phase is funding and construction and payback. So we're going to walk through a little bit more of the details of each of those phases. Phase one starts with, again, that project plan, that planning document that identifies what project you're going to do. We're going to, on the next slide, talk about what items specifically you have to have in the project plan. There's also, as part of that submittal, you have to do the nomination form. And then you also have to include your environmental sign-offs for IHPA, IDNR, things like that. Once that's in good shape, the IEPA issues the preliminary environmental impact determination. You take that PEID and you advertise for your public hearing. You hold your public hearing, and when things are all good with that, if there's anybody that shows up at the public hearing, almost always nobody does, but if they do, they ask questions, you respond to that, you work it through with the IEPA, you get everything in order from paperwork, and your project plan is approved. So again, first step, first phase, got your project plan, you're set up. That whole process, though, from development of project plan through approval could take a year. So it's dependent on how many project plans are sitting on the desk at the IEPA. Therefore, the sooner you get in, the better off you're going to be, because you have to work through to get that plan approved. The next phase then is that loan application development and the design. So the loan application development is filling all that paperwork. So if you're going for a mortgage, for instance, you've got all kinds of different paperwork that you have to fill out during that same period. Typically, when you're filling out all that paperwork, you're showing your dedicated source of funding, you're doing the design. And then getting into the cycle, there's some specific dates and timelines related to the loan program, and they do prioritize projects based on scoring to determine who gets funded. I'm not going to go into that in great detail today, because what has happened with these lead service line replacement projects is they've been basically first come, first serve. So if they continue that, it's not really a worry about the timing of the funding for those type of projects. Getting through the rest of that phase is when you've got your loan application in order, your project plan has been approved, the IEPA says go ahead and go out to bid, you award it, and then eventually you get the loan agreement from the IEPA. So you're not getting the loan agreement until after design, and you're not getting any money until after the loan agreement is executed. Once the loan agreement is executed, you can then submit for funds for your design engineering, and even in some cases, you can get the planning side of things funded as well. But you do have to front fund those efforts, and then you pay yourself back once you get the loan. Then you go into construction, obviously, of the improvements, you work through that, and then eventually you get to loan payback. For most communities, I would say in this room, it would be a 20-year payback. They do have 30-year options, but it's typically based on median household income. These are the specific requirements within the project plan. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read through all of them. The development of the project plan, if it's straight for a lead service line replacement, it can be pretty quick. I would say between 2 and 4 months is pretty reasonable timeline to think about. But then again, you got the IEPA to work through the whole review process. Once you get the project plan approved, it's good for 5 years. So what most people will do is they'll set up an implementation plan that says we're going to do X amount of lead service line replacement in this year 1, year 2, all the way through year 5. Once it's done, that supports 5 years of loans if you want to continue to work through the loan program. And please understand that, a project plan can be solely for lead service line replacement, but it can also include other water improvements if you want. So if you're going to do water main replacement along with it, throw it into that project, and you want to go through the loan program, throw it into that project plan. If you have an elevated tank or a well or water treatment plant or booster pump station you need to improve, that's an option as well. And it's very low interest money when it is a loan. So far for lead service line replacement, it's been principal forgiveness. Another way to say that is grant. But if you did end up going for a loan, 1.11% is the rate coming up here that we're currently in for loans that are issued for that 20-year term. So a couple quick closing comments, just to hit a couple of the things I've already mentioned. The key is planning for 2022. It's right around the corner. So January is going to be here before you know it. With the so-called no partial lead service line replacement and notification requirements, build those timelines in to the CIP projects that you might be moving forward on next year that have lead, so that you're ready to go with that. And then lastly, set that foundation to maximize the funding opportunities. I mean, there's going to be a lot of people, right, looking for money. And if it continues to be free money for lead service lines, the sooner you can get that project plan into the IEPA, the better off you're going to be able to grab that money when it's available. With that, any questions? I think we have maybe 1 minute. Of course,